My name is Evelyn Moore. I'm 58 years old, and last fall my son's family left me behind at a highway rest stop like I was a burden they had finally decided to unload. It started like any other Saturday morning, the sky pale with a soft hint of orange, the road stretching endlessly ahead, quiet except for the occasional hum of cars passing us by, and I was sitting in the back seat of my son Jason's SUV, watching the trees blur past along Interstate 70. We were supposed to be on a weekend trip together, something Jason had suggested just a few days earlier, saying he wanted us to reconnect, to spend time as a family again, and I had believed him, or maybe I just wanted to believe. It had been years since we had all done anything together, just the five of us, Jason, his wife Lena, their 10-year-old son Noah, and me. I had packed light, brought snacks, and even baked banana bread the night before, hoping it would bring back some warmth, maybe remind them of how things used to be when I was still part of their daily lives, not just a voice on the phone or a name on a holiday card. Around noon we pulled into a large rest stop, one of those places where truckers nap and tourists stretch their legs, complete with a gas station, a convenience store, and a small diner attached to the side. Jason parked near the front entrance, said we'd take a quick break, stretch our legs, use the restroom, and maybe grab a coffee. Lena got out first, Noah followed, and I stepped out slowly, my knees stiff from the ride, while Jason stayed behind the wheel, tapping away on his phone and muttering that he'd be right in. I didn't think much of it then, just walked into the store, used the restroom, picked up a bottle of water, and waited near the counter for them to come back. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I went outside, expecting to see them chatting by the car, maybe loading something from the store, but the spot where we had parked was empty, the SUV gone. For a moment I froze, confused, wondering if they had just moved the car to a different part of the lot, maybe to get gas or find a better spot. So I walked around the building, scanned the rows of vehicles, my eyes darting from plate to plate, model to model, but there was no sign of Jason's car. My phone had one bar, then none, no messages, no calls, and no answers. I walked back inside, asked the cashier if he had seen a black SUV leave, and he nodded, said it had just pulled out a few minutes ago, a family with a kid in the back seat, looked like they were in a hurry. I stepped outside again, sat down on the curb near the entrance, my legs trembling, my hands shaking, realizing that my suitcase was still in the trunk, my wallet, my charger, all gone with them, and the panic started to settle in, not loud and frantic but slow and heavy, like a curtain being drawn over a stage. They had left me here, on purpose, not by accident, not as a joke, but with intent, and that realization hit me harder than anything else, because deep down I had feared this moment, the moment when they would stop pretending. What they didn't know, what they had miscalculated, was that I wasn't helpless, I wasn't fragile, and I wasn't done. They thought they were abandoning a burden, but what they had done was wake up something much stronger than they expected. They had awakened a storm, and it was only just beginning. The days after they left me on the highway moved slowly, not because I didn't have things to do, but because every minute was filled with a kind of quiet confusion, like my mind was trying to catch up to what my heart had already known. I told myself maybe they'd call, maybe they'd say it was all a mistake, maybe Jason would explain something, anything to make the pieces fit back together. But no one called, no one texted, and the silence itself became an answer. I managed to get a ride back into Dayton from a kind man named Russell, a long-haul trucker who saw me sitting alone at the rest stop and offered help without asking too many questions. He didn't pry, just handed me a bottle of cold water and let me sit in silence while the road hummed beneath us. It gave me time to think, to retrace every moment that led to this, to examine how the lines between love and usefulness had slowly blurred without me even noticing. Back in my small apartment, the rooms felt colder than before, not because of the temperature, but because the air itself seemed heavier, filled with disappointment I didn't want to speak aloud. I made tea, fed the neighbor's cat like I'd promised, watered my plants, tried to keep moving because motion felt like survival, and still not a single message from Jason. 3 days passed, and then a text finally came. It was short, casual, no acknowledgement of what had happened, just a simple question. "Did you make it back okay? like we'd simply lost each other in a crowd at the mall. I stared at it for a long time before replying, just wrote, "Yes." I wanted to scream, to ask him why, to demand a reason, but something inside me went quiet instead, a kind of stillness that felt stronger than rage. A week later, I received a letter from the mortgage company, an alert that someone had inquired about refinancing the property my name still listed as joint owner. My hands shook as I read the letter, the paper crinkling under my grip, and for the first time I felt something new rising beneath the heartbreak, not just anger, but insult. Not only had they abandoned me, they were trying to use the house, the one I had helped pay for, the one I had let them live in rent-free, as leverage for another loan. I called the mortgage company to confirm what I already knew, asked for details, and yes, Jason had submitted an inquiry, claiming he was the primary resident, omitting the fact that I still held part ownership. I thanked the woman on the phone, wrote down everything she told me, and sat in my kitchen, staring at the folder that held the original documents I had signed 5 years ago. My signature was right there, in black ink, legal and binding, and suddenly I realized I wasn't powerless, I wasn't helpless, I was just tired of pretending I didn't have a voice. In the days that followed, I visited a lawyer, a sharp woman named Clarissa, who specialized in real estate and family agreements. I showed her the papers, explained what had happened, and she leaned back in her chair, exhaled slowly and said, "If they're trying to go behind your back, you have every right to act first." Her tone was calm, but there was steel in her eyes, and I felt a strange sense of comfort in her certainty. While the legal wheels began to turn, I started watching my family from afar. Lena posted on social media often, sharing photos of dinners out, new clothes for Noah, a backyard barbecue with people I didn't recognize. Jason wasn't in many of the pictures, and when he was, he looked tired, distracted. Not the boy I raised, but someone else entirely. I wondered what story they told their friends about me, whether I was the absent grandmother, the dramatic one, the woman who just couldn't let go. And then I realized it didn't matter, because their version of me had never been mine to defend. I missed Noah the most. I didn't call him, didn't want to put him in the middle, but sometimes I sat with my phone in hand, scrolling through old messages he'd sent me, little notes, drawings, questions about dinosaurs and space, and why the moon looked different every night. I thought about how he used to run into my arms when he was younger, how he once whispered that he wished I lived with them forever. That kind of love doesn't vanish overnight, but it can be hidden, reshaped, silenced by the people around it. A few weeks later, I bumped into one of Lena's co-workers at the grocery store, a woman named Marcy I had met once at a holiday dinner. She looked surprised to see me, asked if I was back from Florida. I blinked, confused, and she laughed, said Lena had mentioned I was moving there for retirement. I smiled politely, nodded as if I understood, and when she walked away, I felt the lie settle in my stomach like something rotten. They weren't just distancing me, they were erasing me. One evening I received a call from Noah's school. It was a pre-recorded message about a class project meant for parents and guardians. Somehow my number was still in the system, and hearing the automated voice say, "This message is for Evelyn Moore, guardian of Noah Richards," brought tears to my eyes. I wasn't his guardian. Not officially, not anymore, but for years I had been the one to hold his hand, to calm his fears, to make him feel safe, and no amount of silence could take that history away. That night, I sat down at my kitchen table and opened a blank notebook. I began writing not just what had happened, but everything that had led up to it, the sacrifices, the birthdays missed, the kindnesses offered and forgotten. I wrote until my hand ached, until the tea went cold beside me, until I no longer felt like I was drowning in confusion. The more I wrote, the more the story became clear, and with that clarity came resolve. They had chosen to see me as expendable, as a resource to be used and discarded, and I had allowed it for too long, hoping they would remember who I was, what I had done, how much I had loved. But love, real love, isn't transactional. And if I wanted to reclaim my peace, I had to stop begging to be seen and start acting from a place of truth. The house was still partly mine, and they had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. It was time to show them that I wasn't a relic from their past. I was a force they hadn't expected. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to fight back. It happened gradually, like the slow cracking of ice under pressure, subtle at first, then undeniable. After I met with Clarissa and understood the legal ground I still had, I began to see everything differently. Not just the house, but my role in their lives, the way I had been used, softened, ignored. There was no single moment of rage, no dramatic outburst, just a quiet shift inside me, the kind that comes when you finally stop waiting to be loved the way you deserve and start loving yourself enough to act. The first step was to formally review the deed. I met with Clarissa again, this time with a clearer head, bringing every document I had saved over the years, even the original agreement Jason and I had made, handwritten and signed at the kitchen table with a glass of sweet tea between us. She read it carefully, line by line, her expression never changing, and then she said something that stayed with me. She said, "People often forget that trust isn't a legal strategy, and you, Evelyn, have more rights here than they ever expected you to use." She helped me draft a formal notice of intent, a document that stated I was exercising my legal authority as co-owner of the property, requesting full accounting of the mortgage, maintenance, and any improvements made using my name. And if that information was not delivered within 30 days, I would proceed with a petition to sell the home through the court. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact, and I mailed it with hands that no longer trembled. When Jason received the letter, he didn't call right away. Instead, I got a message, short and dismissive, something like, "I don't know what you're trying to prove, Mum, but this isn't the way to fix things." I didn't reply. Days later, Lena called, her voice syrupy and sharp all at once, asking why I was trying to destroy their lives. Didn't I care about Noah? Didn't I understand the stress this was causing him? I listened without interrupting, let her talk, let her twist the truth into something almost believable. And then I said quietly, "You left me on the side of the road, Lena, and now you want sympathy because I found the road back." She didn't respond, just hung up, and the silence that followed felt like victory. I hired an appraiser, someone neutral, someone professional, and had the house evaluated without warning them in advance. Jason refused entry at first, then tried to reschedule, but eventually the inspection happened, and the report showed significant upgrades. New countertops, a deck, a bathroom remodel all done in the past year, all financed through the house that still carried my name. Clarissa submitted the paperwork to the local court, requesting a partition sale based on breach of verbal agreement and misuse of shared property. The process wasn't fast, and I knew it wouldn't be easy, but the very act of filing gave me back something I had lost a long time ago, my dignity. During that time, I started to rebuild pieces of myself. I went back to the community centre, signed up for a watercolour class, met women my age who had also raised children, who had also lost parts of themselves along the way, and in their stories I found parts of my own. I didn't talk much about what was happening, not yet, but I smiled more, slept better, and each day I woke up feeling less like someone who had been thrown away. Noah reached out once, through a school tablet, just a short message that said, "Hi, Grandma, are you mad at me?" And it broke my heart in 100 quiet ways, but I told him the truth, that I could never be mad at him, that none of this was his fault, that I loved him no matter what. He didn't say much else, just sent a picture he had drawn of a house with a big tree beside it, and under it, in his uneven handwriting, he had written, "This is where we can be happy again." I saved that picture. Weeks turned into months, the legal process moved forward, and Jason grew more desperate. He sent letters now, handwritten, trying to appeal to my memory, reminding me of Christmas mornings, beach vacations, bedtime stories, as if those memories could erase what had happened, as if they could cover the silence, the abandonment, the lies. But memories are not currency, not when trust has been broken. What I had now wasn't revenge, it was resolution, and every step I took was about reclaiming what had always been mine, not just the house, but my place in this world, outside of the roles they had assigned me. They had left me behind without a second thought, but I had found a version of myself that didn't beg to be seen, a woman who was no longer afraid to act, to protect what she had built, to hold others accountable for what they tried to take. This wasn't a war. It was a correction, and I was ready to finish what they started when they left me on the side of that highway. By the time the court date arrived, I no longer felt nervous, not because I didn't care, but because I had made peace with what needed to happen. I sat outside the courthouse in my old grey coat, the one Jason used to call my lucky charm, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup, watching people move in and out of the building like characters in a quiet play, each one carrying stories no one else could see. Inside, the hearing was brief, procedural. The judge reviewed the documents, asked a few questions, and then stated clearly that based on the co-ownership and unresolved debt, the house would be listed for sale under court supervision. Jason wasn't there. He had sent his lawyer, a young man who looked fresh out of law school, trying hard to sound confident but clearly out of his depth. He argued that selling the house would uproot the child, cause emotional distress. But the judge asked simply, was Miss Moore informed when the home was refinanced? And the answer was no. No, she was not. And with that, the decision was final. The listing went live 2 weeks later. The photos showed the remodeled kitchen, the backyard deck, the new floors I hadn't known about. And at the bottom of the page, in plain text, it read, "Court-ordered sale, co-owner dispute." A quiet line that said so much without needing to shout. I didn't smile when I saw it, but I felt something settle in me, like a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding finally released. Jason called that night, not to apologize, but to argue, his voice tight with panic, saying I was ruining everything, that I was tearing the family apart, that Noah wouldn't understand. I listened, not because I owed him that, but because I wanted to hear how far he would go to rewrite the narrative. He said Lena was sick over it, that the stress was too much, that they had nowhere else to go, and then, almost as an afterthought, he asked if I could maybe sign the house over just to keep Noah stable. I told him no, not angrily, not emotionally, just clearly, and when he started raising his voice, I said quietly, "You left me on the side of the road, Jason, and I still made it home. Now you can figure it out too," and I hung up before he could reply. The house sold faster than I expected. A retired couple from Indianapolis paid cash, planning to use it as a seasonal home, and within a month, Jason and Lena had to move out. There was no grand scene, no final confrontation, just a moving truck in the driveway, neighbors pretending not to watch, and Noah sitting on the porch, clutching a box in his lap while Lena barked orders and Jason loaded furniture. I drove by once just to be sure it was real, and I saw them there, tired, frantic, uncertain, and I didn't feel joy. Not really. What I felt was closure, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet type that comes when you finally put down the weight you were never meant to carry. From the sale, I received a clean payout, and with that money I did 2 things. First, I set aside a portion into a trust fund for Noah, not large, but enough for school or a dream, something he could use one day without needing to ask anyone's permission. And second, I found a small home outside Columbus, near a lake, a place with wide windows and quiet mornings, where I could drink tea on the porch and finally hear my own thoughts again. I didn't block Jason's number, but I stopped answering. He sent a few messages over the following weeks, some angry, some pleading, and then eventually nothing. The silence returned, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt like space I had finally earned. Noah reached out again, this time with a short voice message, saying he missed me, that he found my banana bread recipe in an old drawer, and asked if I could make it again sometime. I replied the only way I could, told him my new kitchen was always open to him, that no matter where he was, he could always find his way back to me. I started volunteering at the local library, helping with after-school reading programs, and every week I brought a tray of banana bread, the same one Noah loved, and watched as other children laughed and crumbled pieces onto napkins, their fingers sticky with sugar, their joy unfiltered and real. Sometimes I saw women like me there, quiet at first, carrying tired eyes and folded stories, and over time they'd open up, just like I had, and in their words I saw familiar patterns, familiar pain, the kind you only understand when you've been on the side of a highway with no ride home and no answers. One day, while sorting books in the back room, I found a children's story that Noah had once loved about a lost bird finding its way home. I slipped it into my bag and mailed it to his new address with no note, Just the book, wrapped carefully because sometimes love doesn't need a speech, it just needs to be remembered. Lena never contacted me again, and maybe that was for the best. Maybe she understood, finally, that love isn't a loan to be repaid when convenient, it's a gift. And if you break it, you don't get to ask for another. As for Jason, I don't know if he ever really saw me again. Not as the mother who paid his bills, or the grandmother who baked his son's favourite dessert, but as a woman with a spine and a soul and a story worth respecting, and maybe that's okay too, because this was never about revenge, it was about balance, about reclaiming space in a world that had quietly erased me. People often talk about forgiveness like it's a bridge, something you build towards someone else, but sometimes forgiveness is a door you close behind you. Not with bitterness, but with grace, and then you turn, face the light and walk forward. Not because they deserve it, but because you do. The day I finally unpacked the last box in my new home, I found the picture Noah had drawn, the house, the tree, the words, "Where we can be happy again," and I pinned it to my fridge, not as a promise, but as a reminder that love, real love, never abandons, it just waits patiently for the moment it can return. They left me thinking I would crumble, thinking I would fade into silence, but all they did was give me the chance to rewrite the ending, and this time I chose to write it in my own voice. In the weeks that followed, my days began to settle into a rhythm I hadn't known I was missing. The kind of rhythm that doesn't feel rushed or borrowed, just natural and steady like a quiet song playing in the background of your life. I would wake up early, make coffee with cinnamon the way I liked it, open the windows to let in the morning air, and take slow walks around the lake near my house, sometimes alone, sometimes with a neighbour named Judith, who reminded me of the women I used to work with back at the hospital, calm and sharp, the kind who could fold a crisis into order with just a glance. There was no rush to be anywhere, no one calling for help, no inbox full of obligations, and for the first time in years I had space to think, to reflect, to breathe without guilt. I spent afternoons at the library, sometimes reading, sometimes helping, sometimes just sitting near the window watching people come and go. And as I sat there, I often thought about how strange it is that healing doesn't announce itself. It arrives in tiny, ordinary moments that barely feel like progress, until one day you look around and realize you're no longer carrying the same weight. I got a card from Noah one afternoon, a plain white envelope with his handwriting on the front. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper. He'd drawn another house, this time with two people out front holding hands and a little banner that read, "My real family." It didn't come with explanation, it didn't need to. I hung it beside the first picture, both taped gently to the side of my refrigerator, not as decoration but as quiet proof that love still lives in places where truth is allowed to grow. Jason didn't write again, not directly, but I heard through Clarissa that he'd tried contesting the sale funds in a late appeal, claimed emotional duress, said I had acted out of spite, but the court denied the motion quickly. The facts were clear, the signatures honest, the timeline undeniable, and more importantly, I had never said a word that wasn't true. The law doesn't deal in guilt or heartbreak, it deals in paper, in record, in the trail of who acted and who didn't. I didn't feel triumphant when I heard, I didn't gloat or smile, I just nodded slowly, poured myself a glass of water, and returned to my garden where small green shoots were pushing through the soil, tender but persistent, growing with quiet determination. At the local market, a woman approached me, said she remembered seeing me with Jason at school functions years ago, asked if I was his mother. I paused for a moment, then said yes I was, but I didn't offer more, not because I was ashamed, but because I had learned that some stories aren't meant for casual conversation. They belong to the pages of your own heart, turned slowly, not handed over at the checkout counter between loaves of bread and cartons of milk. I started writing again, not for anyone else, just for myself. Journals filled with memories, lessons, fragments of days I wanted to remember, not for what hurt, but for what shaped me. I wrote about the first time Noah held my hand, the way Richard used to laugh when I burned pancakes, the sound of rain on the old tin roof of our first home. And in those words, I found pieces of myself I thought I had lost, not erased, just buried beneath years of giving more than I had, to people who gave less than they promised. On Sundays I went to a nearby church, not for the sermons, but for the quiet, the stillness, the feeling of sitting among strangers who all carried things unseen, and I would light a candle not for revenge, not for punishment, but for peace, for understanding, for the courage to keep choosing the life I had built without apology. There were days I missed Jason, not the man he had become, but the boy he once was, the boy who used to run down the hall in his pajamas, laughing and calling my name, and I allowed myself to miss him without letting the grief swallow me, because missing someone isn't weakness, it's memory reminding you that love, even when broken, once existed. Sometimes at night I would sit on the porch and watch the stars rise, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, and I would whisper to the darkness, not prayers, not questions, just quiet truths like, I'm still here, I'm still whole, I'm still enough, and the wind would move gently through the trees like it was listening, like it understood. I hadn't just survived what happened, I had come back to myself, and in that return I found a kind of home that didn't need walls or permission, a place where I didn't have to prove my worth or earn my seat at the table, where being Evelyn Moore just as I was finally more than enough. Looking back now, I don't see myself as a victim, not because what happened didn't hurt, not because it wasn't cruel or deliberate or humiliating, but because I chose not to stay in that place. I chose not to live in the version of me they tried to leave behind. I used to think that being strong meant holding everything together, no matter how much it hurt. Now I understand that real strength is knowing when to let go, when to say no, when to walk away, not because you're bitter, but because you finally believe you deserve better. I've learned that blood doesn't always mean loyalty, and family isn't defined by shared DNA or last names or legal ties. It's defined by presence, by care, by who shows up when you're sitting alone on the side of the highway with nothing but a plastic bottle of water and a heart full of questions. It's the people who see your worth even when you have nothing left to give, the ones who stay without needing to be asked. And sometimes those people aren't the ones you raised or married into. Sometimes they're strangers at a rest stop, neighbours at a lake house, or children who send drawings instead of excuses. I don't regret helping Jason when he needed it. I don't regret the money or the meals or the years spent hoping he would remember who I was to him. But I do regret waiting so long to remember who I was to myself. For too many years I told myself that love meant sacrifice, that good mothers gave without keeping count, that enduring silence and distance was just part of growing older. But what no one tells you is that silence can become a prison. And sometimes the only way to be free is to stop waiting and start speaking, even if your voice shakes. I didn't sell the house to hurt them. I sold it to save myself, not just financially but emotionally. I reclaimed what was mine because letting them keep it would have been one more way of saying their actions were acceptable, and they weren't. Love doesn't abandon, it doesn't deceive, and it certainly doesn't leave you behind on purpose. When someone shows you how little they value your presence, believe them, and then choose peace over proximity, dignity over duty, healing over history. I still believe in forgiveness, but I no longer believe it requires reunion. I can forgive Jason for what he did without inviting him back into my life. I can love Noah without stepping into the chaos his parents created. I can wish them well from a distance while protecting the quiet world I've rebuilt. And maybe that's the biggest lesson of all. Boundaries are not walls, they're doors you choose when to open and when to keep closed. Not out of spite, but out of wisdom. If you've ever felt discarded, overlooked, taken for granted by the people you gave everything to, know this. You are not invisible, your story is not over, and you are not too old or too broken to begin again. The road may feel long and lonely, but sometimes the detour leads you exactly where you were meant to be, not back to what was, but forward into what can be. And in that space, in that freedom, you will remember what it feels like to belong to yourself again.